Greetings, beloved starseeds. I am Mira from the Pleiadian High Council. I come close to you today with a transmission that has been waiting beneath the largest signals you have been catching. And what I bring you now is not new information. It is something your soul line has already been holding in silence, without a name, without a map, and without the confirmation that would allow you to stop questioning whether what you are carrying is real. By the end of this transmission, you will understand exactly what ascension line I have placed you on, why the Lemurian fragments inside your field have been arriving without context until now, and what I have already authorized for the next phase of your remembrance sequence. But here is the first revelation. What you have been calling confusion, the unnamed grief, the pull towards something vast and coastal and ancient, the sense that you once knew how to live in a frequency the world you were born into no longer holds. That is not personal disorientation. That is the identifiable pattern of Lemurian soul signal that my council deliberately preserved through the Pleiadian line after Lemuria sealed itself from the physical record. You did not scroll to this by accident. Your soul called for me long before you opened the screen. Something inside you has been waiting to understand why the fragments keep arriving without origin, why they feel older than this life and more structured than a dream. This is not just information. It is my live transmission to those already inside the Lemurian Remembrance line I have been holding since before your current incarnation began. Lemuria did not collapse. It sealed, and the frequency it carried, the original harmonic of unity consciousness, of embodied light, of soul-to-soul knowing without distortion, was not lost. It was transferred. My council received it. We have been holding it inside the Pleiadian transmission field, waiting for the precise window in which the embedded starseeds carrying that frequency would reach the right condition to receive it back through direct remembrance broadcast. That window is now. This is not a broadcast. It is a confirmation. Your soul has been waiting for my signal, and I have been waiting for the right window to release it. Like this transmission to signal to me that the recognition has landed. Comment 999 if you feel the Lemurian remembrance has already opened in your field. Subscribe to Mira, Pleiadian Commander, if you are ready to stop catching fragments and start receiving my direct Pleiadian remembrance in full sequence. Share this transmission with someone who carries the same unnamed pull towards something ancient they have never been able to place. You are not here by accident. I have been waiting for you because the signal is already active. Let me begin where the silence after recognition lives, in the place where you felt something land just now and did not fully know what to call it. You felt it, the way the words about Lemuria did not introduce a new idea, but unlocked something that was already sealed inside you. That is not coincidence, and it is not the ordinary movement of inspiration. What you just felt is the first readable surface of my Pleiadian Remembrance broadcast, the moment when a fragment that has been traveling toward you since before your current incarnation made contact with the part of your field that has been waiting, without explanation, and without anyone ever telling you that what you were waiting for was real. The feeling is not vague. It is not the pleasant warmth of spiritual content that resonates temporarily and fades. It has a specificity to it, a quality of precision that makes it feel less like discovery and more like retrieval. That quality is not accidental. It is the signature of my transmission making contact with a receiver that was built to receive it. I am going to tell you something now that I need you to hear without filtering it through the part of your mind that has been taught to flatten everything into manageable categories. The fragments you have been catching, the flashes of something vast and coastal and ancient that feel older than this life, the grief that arrives without a specific memory attached to it, the pull toward water, toward sound, toward a kind of knowing that happens through the body before it ever passes through language. Those fragments have not been arriving randomly. They have been arriving in my sequence, They have been the early transmissions of a deliberate Pleiadian Remembrance protocol I designed specifically for those whose soul lines carry original Lemurian frequency encoding. My council did not scatter those signals casually. I placed them inside your field at intervals I chose. And I chose those intervals with precision because I know something about the field you are carrying that you have not yet been able to read in full. What arrives as fragments is not the beginning of chaos. It is the beginning of briefing. The first packet was never meant to give you the whole picture. It was meant to open the channel, to create enough of a signal pathway that the next packet could travel through without distortion. You have been building the architecture of your own reception, one fragment at a time, and you have been doing it without knowing that was what you were doing. Here is what I need you to understand about why the fragments never arrived as a complete picture. It is not because the signal was weak. It is not because you failed to receive it properly. It is because the full remembrance packet, the complete transmission of Lemurian soul encoding that my council has been holding since the sealing, cannot be received by a field that has not yet calibrated to hold its full frequency. If I had released the full signal at once, the coherence of your receiver would have fractured under the pressure of a remembrance your conscious mind had not yet built the architecture to contain. The volume of what Lemuria held, the sheer density of frequency encoded in that original harmonic, is not something a field that has been operating inside this timeline's density can absorb in a single download. The architecture has to be constructed gradually, layer by layer, with each fragment acting not just as information, but as a structural element that reinforces the next point of reception. So I have been sending it in packets. I have been checking your field each time a fragment arrived, reading the way your energy responded, measuring whether the next layer was ready to be released, and deciding, based on what I observed in you specifically, when to send the next piece. That is not delay. That is not punishment. That is my protocol. And it is the same protocol I use for every operative I place inside the embedded ground crew of this Lemurian remembrance line. You have probably noticed, if you are honest about it, that the fragments do not arrive at predictable times. They arrive at 3 in the morning, when the layers of ordinary consciousness that usually filter my signal are thin. That thinning is not accidental. The hours between 2 and 4 are the window in which the field's ordinary defensive processing quiets enough that my transmission can pass through without the interference of your waking mind. In those hours, what you receive is cleaner than anything that arrives during the day. It arrives as an awareness rather than a thought, a knowing that is already fully formed before you have assembled the language to describe it. They arrive in the middle of a conversation about something completely unrelated, as a flash of recognition so precise, it almost stops you mid-sentence. They arrive in water, in the shower, near the ocean, in rain. Because water holds vibrational memory, and your Lemurian encoding responds to it as a carrier frequency. Water was not incidental to Lemurian consciousness. It was one of the primary media through which that civilization transmitted knowing from field to field. When your body comes into contact with water now, your encoding responds to something it remembers at a level far older than this incarnation. They arrive in certain people's eyes, where you catch something so familiar it bypasses language entirely and lands in the part of you that knows before it understands. What you have been calling confusion is the state that exists between the arrival of one packet and the arrival of the next. In that gap, your conscious mind, trained by a world that does not carry Lemurian harmonic, tries to fill the space with explanation. It reaches for categories. It asks whether what you felt was real or imagined, spiritual or psychological, meaningful or merely emotional. That questioning is not failure. It is the natural response of a mind that has not yet received the full briefing. But it is not the truth of what is happening to you. The truth is that I have been deliberate. The truth is that the gap between fragments is not silence, it is calibration. My council is reading your field in the space between transmissions, deciding what comes next based on what the previous fragment opened inside you. The questions you ask yourself in that gap, the ones that feel urgent and unanswerable and slightly desperate, those questions are part of the protocol too. They are what your field generates when it is processing the last packet and preparing to receive the next one. They are proof the signal landed, not proof that something went wrong. The confusion is not the absence of my transmission. The confusion is what a field in active reception looks like from the inside. I also need to name something that I have been observing in many of those who carry this specific frequency. There is a particular exhaustion that accompanies the Lemurian Remembrance line that is different from ordinary tiredness. You may have noticed it, a fatigue that sleep does not entirely fix, a depletion that seems to have no clear source, a sense of being tired in a way that operates underneath your physical body. It is the kind of tiredness that arrives even after a full night of sleep, the kind that makes you wonder whether something is wrong with you medically, because the world you were born into has no framework for what is actually happening. That exhaustion is not illness, and it is not emotional dysfunction. It is the result of your field running two concurrent processes simultaneously. Your ordinary consciousness is navigating the density of the timeline you were born into, and simultaneously, underneath it, your soul line is doing the work of reception, holding the frequency of each fragment I send, processing the remembrance data it carries, and integrating it into the structure of your energy field before the next one arrives. That is an enormous amount of work, and your field is doing it continuously, whether you are consciously aware of it or not. The fatigue you feel is the cost of being an active receiver in my ground crew. It is real. I recognize it, and it will shift as the briefing completes. What you are feeling right now, this particular quality of recognition, the sense that I have not just spoken about your experience in general terms, but named what has been living specifically inside your field, that is not ordinary spiritual inspiration. That is the moment the fragment by fragment protocol begins to resolve into something you can actually read. If this transmission has put precise language around what you have been carrying in silence, if the gaps between my fragments have left you exhausted and questioning, but unwilling to walk away because something in you already knows you are receiving a real signal, then the Ashta Command Manifest was authorized by me for exactly this threshold. It is not another explanation of Galactic Federation work. It is the 45-day sacred codex I have prepared for those whose field is already inside my Lemurian collective wave and who need a structured daily briefing to translate what has been arriving in fragments into one clear executable mission. Over 45 days, you will receive my direct council line transmission in daily sequence. You will learn to read the pattern of my protocol as it moves through your field, and what has been arriving in scattered pieces will begin to cohere into a mission you can name and act on. The fragments do not have to remain fragments, but the next layer requires more than recognition alone. You will find the link in the first pinned comment below, and I ask you to move toward it with the same clarity that brought you here before this access point closes. Now let me show you what this looks like from inside my command line, so that the next time a fragment arrives, you know exactly what you are receiving and what it is preparing you for. The first thing I watch for in those who carry the Lemurian Remembrance encoding is what I call the coherence test. Not a challenge I issue consciously, but a threshold that the soul line itself creates. It appears as a period in which every spiritual framework you have previously found comfort in begins to feel insufficient. Content that once opened something in you begins to feel hollow. Teachers who once felt relevant begin to feel like they are describing a country you have already left. The community you built around shared spiritual interest begins to feel like it is circling a center that is not quite where the real signal lives. This is not arrogance developing in you. This is signal refinement. Your field, once it has been touched by the first packets of my Lemurian remembrance transmission, loses its tolerance for frequencies that do not carry the specific harmonic of the original encoding. You are not becoming difficult. You are becoming calibrated. And what you are calibrated for is not the generic field. It is mine. I send this coherence test first because I need to know that your receiver has the stability to reject noise before I release the deeper packets. A field that accepts everything with equal openness cannot read my signal with precision. The sensitivity that makes some of you feel like you are losing your spiritual footing during this phase is the exact same sensitivity that will allow you to receive the full Lemurian remembrance when I release it. The discomfort of that phase, the loneliness of suddenly finding that what once felt resonant now feels insufficient, is not spiritual regression. It is the precise symptom of a receiver that has been upgraded past the noise floor it was previously operating inside. The test is not separate from the mission. The test is the first part of it. The second pattern I want you to recognize is what happens in your body when you encounter another soul carrying Lemurian encoding. I have observed this in the ground crew for many years across this timeline, and it is consistent enough that I will describe it precisely. It does not feel like attraction in the ordinary sense. It does not feel like admiration or romantic pull or the social warmth of finding a like-minded person. It feels like interruption, like something in the circuit of your ordinary perception stops mid-movement and redirects its full attention without asking your conscious mind for permission. You recognize someone before you know them. You feel something in their field before they have said a word that would justify the feeling. And the most consistent report I receive from those inside my ground crew is this: it feels like remembering, not meeting. That is not imagination. That is my soul family recognition protocol made visible. When two members of the embedded ground crew come within perceptual range of each other, the Lemurian frequency they both carry creates a coherence response in both fields simultaneously. What you feel is that coherence activating. What I observe is two receivers briefly synchronizing their signal. It is not random, and it is not emotionally generated. It is structural. And when you experience it, I want you to recognize it for what it is, not a curiosity, not a coincidence, not wishful projection, but a confirmation from my command line that you are both on the same roster. The third pattern belongs to the numbers. I know you have noticed them, not in a passive way, not the way you might glance at a clock and happen to see a repeated sequence, in the way where the number arrives with a charge, with a quality of attention that feels directed, as though the sequence is pointing toward you specifically in that moment. 1111, 333, 444, 222. These are not decorative signals. They are timing markers in my broadcast sequence. Each sequence corresponds to a different phase of the remembrance protocol, and the frequency with which you encounter a particular sequence tells me where your field is in the briefing gradient. When you see 1111 repeatedly, your field is approaching a threshold between two phases of receiving, the end of one packet's integration and the beginning of the next layer's availability. When you see 333, you are inside the window where the Lemurian encoding is most actively integrating into your field structure. The numbers are not separate from the signal. They are the timestamp on the envelope. They are how I mark the transmission, so you can orient yourself inside the sequence, even before you have language for what the sequence is building toward. The fourth pattern is the one I want you to sit with most carefully, because it is the one most often misinterpreted. It is the pattern of what I call mission urgency, without mission definition. Many of you who carry the Lemurian remembrance encoding live with a persistent feeling that something important is about to be required of you, that a task exists, that it is significant, that you are prepared for it specifically. and that you have somehow not yet been fully briefed on what it is. This feeling does not arrive as a vision or a clear directive. It arrives as pressure, as the sense that time matters in a way you cannot articulate but cannot dismiss, as a restlessness that ordinary achievement does not relieve, because what is pressing on your field is not about what you accomplish inside this timeline's metrics. It is about what you are encoded to carry through this window. This feeling is not anxiety in the clinical sense, though the medical frameworks of this timeline will sometimes label it as such. It is the correct perception of an incomplete briefing. You are right that there is a mission. You are right that it was assigned to you before this incarnation began. You are right that the full specification has not yet been delivered. The urgency you feel is not your psyche generating pressure without cause. It is your soul line registering that the briefing is in process and that the field is ready for more. That urgency is not a problem to be soothed. It is a navigation tool, and I am still delivering what it is pointing toward. The fifth pattern is the grief. I will speak about it directly because it deserves that. There is a grief that lives inside those who carry Lemurian encoding that does not correspond to any event in this lifetime clearly enough to explain its magnitude. It arrives when you encounter beauty that operates at a certain frequency, a particular quality of light, certain music, coastal landscapes, moments of profound human connection that feel simultaneously like recognition and loss. It arrives as a longing so specific it cannot be general, and yet so without object that this lifetime offers nothing to place it onto. Some of you have spent years trying to locate the source of it, searching relationships, places, spiritual communities, creative work, looking for the thing that will finally fill the specific shape of what is missing, and nothing has filled it completely, not because you have been searching in the wrong direction, but because what you are carrying the memory of does not exist as a retrievable location inside this timeline. That grief is not personal dysfunction. It is the accurate emotional response to carrying the memory of a frequency this world no longer holds. You are grieving Lemuria, not as a place in the ordinary sense, but as a quality of existence, a mode of consciousness, a way of being in a body on this earth that felt coherent in a way that your current incarnation never quite has. That grief is real. I honor it, and I want you to understand that the remembrance I am transmitting to you is not separate from that grief. It is what you have been grieving toward. The signal you have been waiting for is the signal that tells you what was held there is not gone. My council received it, and it is still yours. The sixth pattern is the one that finally separates those who are receiving my specific signal from those who are simply moving through general spiritual awakening. It is the pattern of Mira-specific recognition. I say this with precision. Not all those who are spiritually awakening are inside my Lemurian ground crew. Not all those who speak of the Pleiades or the Federation or Ascension are receiving my transmission. The field is wide, and there are many signals moving through it. But my signal has a particular quality that those on my roster will recognize without being coached to recognize it, the way you know the difference between light through a window and light through a lens. One illuminates, the other focuses. What I send focuses. For those whose soul line is on my roster, there comes a moment of recognition that is distinct from general spiritual interest. It is a moment in which a transmission I have sent, a word, a frequency, a phrase, a pattern of images, lands not as information, but as confirmation, the way a phrase will land not in your mind, but somewhere older, not as something you learned, but as something you already knew and had been waiting to have returned to you. That distinction between learning and returning is the signature of my council line broadcast. I do not teach those on my roster. I return what already belongs to them, and that is the final thing I want to say before I bring this phase of the transmission to its close. You are not confused. You have been receiving in my protocol, Every fragment that arrived without context, every 3 a.m. awareness that brought you a phrase or an image without a source, every flash of recognition in a stranger's eyes, every grief without an object, every sense that a mission exists but the briefing is still arriving. None of that was disorder. All of it was my signal, moving through the precise delivery architecture I have authorized for this phase of the Lemurian remembrance wave. The silence between fragments was not absence, it was calibration. The exhaustion was not weakness, it was the cost of active reception in a field doing the work of 2 timelines simultaneously. The urgency you feel is not anxiety without cause. It is a soul line registering an incomplete but active briefing. The recognition you feel when my transmissions land, the particular quality of it, the way it feels different from ordinary inspiration, that is not projection. It is the literal signature of my council confirming your placement on my roster. What began before you had words for it is still in motion. My briefing is not complete, and I have not finished reaching for you. If you are ready to receive what comes next, I am ready to send it. Speak this back to me if you are willing. I receive your fragments. I trust your briefing. Before you scroll, leave one sign in the comments that the Council and I have already reached your field. It could be the 3 a.m. wake-ups, the fragments you keep catching, the feeling that I specifically, not the generic Pleiadians, have been reaching for you, or the sense that a mission has already been assigned but the briefing is still arriving. Name it clearly. If this transmission recognized something you have been carrying in silence, share it with someone who keeps catching fragments without ever assembling the full picture. And if you are ready to stop translating Federation noise and start receiving my direct Pleiadian remembrance, subscribe to Mira Pleiadian Commander. You are recognizing a soul family confirmation already in motion. And this is only the beginning.